Hello and welcome to JSB Talks Digital, the podcast for marketers, digital transformation champions, and those of you bringing your skills into the digital age. I'm Joanne Sweeney-Burke and this podcast is brought to you by Digital Training Institute. In this episode, number 112, I'm reopening the Bloggers Unveiled can of worms and telling you what I really think about their Instagram account, the rumours, and the impact on blogger and influencer marketing in Ireland. In social media news, LinkedIn rolls out voice messaging, Facebook is testing Do Not Disturb for notifications, and no more cross-posting tweets to Facebook. I interview investigative journalist with the Sunday Times, John Mooney, about his article on Bloggers Unveiled. In Shoutouts, 3 ways to audit a blogger's digital influence. Ask JSB in JSB's column what I really think about influencer marketing and Bloggers Unveiled. And find out what social media tool saved my working week.
Social media news.
As we know, voice is growing in prominence, and LinkedIn is the latest social network to capitalise on voice messaging. But will it work? In a blog post, Zach Hendlin points to 3 reasons LinkedIn is adding 1-minute voice messaging to the professional networking site. Easily message on the go. LinkedIn say that people speak about 4 times faster than they type, making voice messaging great for explaining longer or more complex ideas without the time and involvement of typing and editing a message. Get to it when you can. LinkedIn says leaving a voice message can often be better for a recipient than calling them, since they can listen and respond when they have a free moment. And finally, they say that we can better express ourselves. Speaking in your own voice allows you to build a more personal connection and effectively communicate. They say it's easier for your tone and personality to come through, which can sometimes get lost in translation in written communications. Well, as a podcaster, I totally agree with LinkedIn on that account. It seems like Facebook is also testing a new mute button, but for notifications, which will work like a Do Not Disturb button. This comes following a series of moves to help our mental well-being, as we know how addictive Facebook is. The aim is to prevent Facebookers from being sucked into the app when we're trying to avoid it and making it less obtrusive. So, rather than going Facebook cold turkey and deleting the app entirely, Facebook is going to trial muting notifications. It's only a test at this stage, and so far no confirmations of plans to roll it out to all users. So it seems that cross-posting tweets to Facebook is no more. Well, this latest news from Twitter is music to my social media ears. Twitter announced that functionality is now coming to an end and users will instead have to copy a tweet's URL if they want to share a tweet to Facebook. In a statement, the company attributed the change to a recent Facebook update. The issue has to do with Facebook's lockdown of its API platform, an overhaul that's been underway following the Cambridge Analytica scandal. But in my view, it's good practice for social media.
Interview.
In this episode, I interview John Mooney, investigative journalist with the Sunday Times. John has written extensively on politics, crime, terrorism and intelligence issues, amongst others. He regularly works as a consultant to CBS, the BBC, Channel 4 and RTE. He has also written a number of books and created and devised a number of TV series. He's also involved in publishing books on non-fiction with Maverick House. In this interview, John and I discuss his recent article on Bloggers Unveiled and why he's convinced Ramona Tracy has no case to answer.
JSB Talks Digital.
John Mooney, thank you so much for joining me on JSB Talks Digital.
That's no problem. You're more than welcome.
So, when I read your article about Bloggers Unveiled, I have to admit, because I follow your work, because I'm very interested in policing and security, and I wrote a book on how police forces use social media. So, when I saw you writing about Bloggers Unveiled, I was like, oh, this is interesting. So, what prompted you, or how did you get involved in the story?
Well, I suppose that all journalists now are looking at what's happening in the online world, and that includes me. I've become aware that there was this account, Bloggers Unveiled, that it had, I suppose, that it was acting as a kind of watchdog for the Irish fashion industry. And I was very much interested in the fact that it had attracted this huge phenomenal following very, very fast. In point of fact, I would say that its rise and, I suppose, popularity was almost unprecedented, given what it was, given that it was kind of acting as a kind of mini media organisation, questioning what was happening in that whole world. So I became interested in it. I became even more interested when I heard that there were people being accused of running the account, that there had been legal threats delivered to the account, and that in point of fact things had reached a stage where there were people presenting themselves to the Gardaí stating that they were worried about their own safety because they were being targeted, allegedly because they ran this account. So it ticked a lot of boxes for us.
And of course, you had the opportunity to speak to Ramona Tracy directly. Is it fair to ask whether you approached her or she approached you?
Oh no, we located her. I'd become aware that that particular individual was being named online as the person who was controlling that account. So we made it our business to find out where she was and did approach her, seeking comment and trying to establish or verify the accuracy or inaccuracy of those reports that were circulating online. So we went looking for her.
And, it certainly is a public interest story at this stage. I mean, I followed the account, I've followed the comments, and I would go as far to say perhaps the vitriol on that account. And there's a lot of commentary about it. You were satisfied, and you wrote this in your article, that Ramona Tracy is not behind, or was not behind, Bloggers Unveiled, and that Instagram account has now been disbanded.
Well, we approached her, and when the Sunday Times approaches any investigation like this, we do so from an impartial viewpoint. There's a lot of material floating around online. Now, I discussed that with Ramona Tracy. We put certain allegations to her, and there was explanations given for how some of this material had arrived where it did. What I will say is that at all times she stated emphatically that she did not run the Bloggers Unveiled account. She did make certain admissions about having maybe acted in a very inappropriate way whilst online in other forums, and maybe did things that she regretted in her younger life, and explained the background to these and some personal issues that she had. So she was quite upfront about all of that. We cannot find any hard evidence to suggest that she ran that account. My own feeling, just as someone who investigates far more serious matters than this, is that she wasn't running that account for lots of different reasons. I understand she was in touch with Bloggers Unveiled, whomever ran that account. She had outlined various allegations that were being made about her, and there was some sort of dialogue between the two sides. And I've seen that, so I'm satisfied that is the case. So there are also other issues and other information that I can't really go into that would make me suspect that it's not Ramona Tracy and indeed someone else. But again, just as a journalist, we play it straight down the line. She is emphatically denied this. She would have showed me evidence that would suggest that she's not Bloggers Unveiled, although she may have communicated with whomever was running that account. I have to say, what I would describe as hard evidence is very different to what maybe other people would consider to be evidence, and particularly images that are floating around online. I get all these calls from people who claim to have very inside information and all of this. But really, when you look at this, that there was actually no evidence whatsoever, and that there was nothing there that I would regard as feeling in any way substantial enough to enter into a court case or defend in a public forum. There's certain criteria that you use to establish and verify evidence, and a lot of stuff going around online wouldn't be something that I would put a lot of faith in. And I think it's also important to say that people sometimes act in an entirely inappropriate way in certain forums and in certain they do things that maybe they definitely shouldn't be doing, but it doesn't mean that they're automatically guilty of a separate allegation that's made against them. And that's something that, for example, professional investigators will be very aware of, that sometimes that because someone does one thing, it doesn't mean that they've done another.
The Gardaí are now involved. It is a criminal investigation. Where that goes, it remains to be seen. Does that lead us to think that the real person or the individual behind Bloggers Unveiled might be uncovered because of this investigation?
The Guards have no interest in Bloggers Unveiled, because Bloggers Unveiled is just a social media account that made allegations against people from in an anonymous fashion. The Guards are interested in is people sending death threats to Ramona Tracy and people who are harassing her. Harassment is an offence in the Criminal Justice Act in this country. You cannot go around attacking people, calling them names online, etc., etc. There are criminal sanctions against people who engage in that type of activity, particularly when it's persistent. Where the identity of whomever was operating Bloggers Unveiled, where that may enter the public domain or that may be disclosed, is via a company called Carrie's Closet, which was targeted by Bloggers Unveiled. Bloggers Unveiled made certain allegations against Carrie's Closet. They utterly rejected these. The rights or the wrongs of that are I suppose for another forum. But suffice to say that they hired a very prestigious legal team in Dublin, led by Darragh Robinson, who's solicitor with Sheehan & Company, and they had sent a number of legal threats to Bloggers Unveiled, saying they will obtain what's called as an Orange Pharmacal order in the High Court. And that is an order that's served on social media companies and forces them to identify the IP address and disclose the identity of someone using their platform. So that threat was issued. Bloggers Unveiled came down and went offline very, very fast after that threat was issued. The people involved in Carrie's Closet have told me they're pursuing that order and will do so in the next when the courts return from the summer recess. So if they're going to be unveiled, it's going to be through that mechanism. Privately, as someone who's been around the block in terms of cybersecurity and that, I suspect that whomever set up Bloggers Unveiled didn't fully understand what they were doing and obviously how popular it would become. So if you can imagine, you're sitting at home, you decide to set up this account and start targeting people. You might have done it from your phone in your own home, which is logging on to the Wi-Fi network there, and it's created the Instagram account via your home or your office's Wi-Fi network. So in that case, that person can be very quickly identified via an Orange Pharmacal order, as in who owns the IP address, who would have access to that. And, you're probably, if it's a family home, it's probably liable to be one person. If it's in an office, the company would have an obligation to discover who it was very quickly. So there's all sorts of issues there. I would suspect that whoever set up and ran Bloggers Unveiled immediately realised they had a cybersecurity problem and they were open to detection, and that's why I suspect it was closed down. I don't think it had anything got to do with Ramona Tracy or anything like that.
The conversations continue online right to this day about Bloggers Unveiled, who was behind it, and so on. People are not considering the ramifications of what they are saying at all? Do you think that there's a level of immaturity or an I don't care attitude when people continue to make public statements based on their own opinions?
I think there's a number of things going on. I think I was I have to admit I was quite amazed at the level of interest in the story, but I was also quite amazed at the naivety of people in terms of what they say online about people. There are cases coming now before the court every day of the week on people who have posted material online and the substantial damages and awards being given to the injured parties on this. I can tell you, as someone who's fought and won quite significant defamation hearings, that when in court, it is not simply, well, I believe this or I believe that. You're looking at hard evidence that has to be substantiated by technical experts and everything else. And I find it almost impossible to see how a lot of this material that's being published online is in any way justifiable. I think it borders on the criminal end of things, but certainly on the slanderous and defamatory. And I really don't think people, certainly some of the commentary that I've heard and seen, it's pretty grotesque. It's kind of interesting because many people that engage in this would be actually could be accused of trolling themselves and involved in very reprehensible behaviour. And that I think what was really interesting about, what really just astonished me about this whole thing was that kind of culture of online comment, that it really is the Wild West, that people feel they can say whatever they want, they can throw around allegations like confetti, they communicate one another. I was amazed. I was getting emails and phone calls and DMs on Twitter and messages on Facebook from people with all sorts of information or alleged information about these matters and Bloggers Unveiled and this, that and the other. But when you scratched into this and you delved into it or you start asking them very pertinent questions, very few of them are able to answer anything. And it's almost kind of like bizarre behaviour where they're quoting other people as if that was somehow sort of solid proof. People ring me up and saying, such and such a person has a friend in Facebook or Instagram that accessed the account and they learned who it was. Well, Facebook and Instagram don't work like that. They've quite tight security systems in place to protect people, and that there's all sorts of stuff going on. That a lot of it, in sort of a normal society wouldn't really get any traction, and it would certainly never enter into print or be broadcast or anything like that. But instead on social media, it's said quite freely, and I was kind of surprised at just how freely and how loosely people spoke about this. Like the Irish courts are giving out awards against people who've retweeted information that's turned out not to be true, and quite serious allegations about people that's that hasn't been true. I've also been just astonished almost about these forums where people are kind of trading insults at one another and seem to spend a large part of their evenings doing this. Like anyone who knows anything about stalking and that kind of stuff, or cyber stalking or nuisance phone calls, would know that you ignore this, that you don't. You get the police involved, obviously, but you primarily ignore it and don't feed into it, rather than engaging in all this kind of chewing and throwing. And that kind of behaviour, I suppose, astonished me that people that were being targeted, that they enter into these kind of dialogues where they're trying to disprove an allegation made against them by some anonymous person or whomever. It is in many ways it's kind of a bizarre world, and it will only really, people are being sued on these type of issues, and I'm not saying that that's going to happen in this case, but if it did happen, it wouldn't surprise me at all.
And that leads me to ask you the question about the professionalism of the blogger and the influencer industry. Like you, I trained as a journalist, so I understand very astutely the laws around defamation and slander, and there are proper protocols and guidelines that you have to uphold in your profession. The problem is this has turned out to be a lucrative industry, but with very little regulation. We have the ASAA, they stepped in, the PRII, but do you think it needs more rigorous policing, and is it even possible?
I think the guards and the PSNI certainly, when people are being trolled and humiliated and attacked online, I think they are getting to a stage now where they're going to start arresting and charging people with harassment, etc. I think that is happening. I think it's probably going to come as common as a police officer charging someone for assaulting someone outside a pub or something like that. In terms of, I think what really is going to happen with all of this, because you can see legal firms becoming very much aware of these issues. You're going to see a lot of litigation coming against people who engage in this kind of conduct online, including people like Bloggers Unveiled and that kind of stuff. And so you'll see these kind of actions. People have this bizarre belief that somehow, if you say something online, it's different from saying it in the real world. They really do believe that if you're using a pay-as-you-go phone, that you cannot be traced, or that if you use some sort of made-up name on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, or wherever, that you cannot be traced, and it's simply not true. All of those social media companies, when police get in touch with them, usually volunteer the information really, really quickly. I know of contacts of mine who've been involved in sensitive investigations where images have been uploaded on the net or on platforms like Facebook, that they need to get down very quickly. The Facebook have offered to do it literally within 2 minutes, and they were able to say exactly the names and addresses of where everywhere that these images were uploaded from. So there's an incredible level of, I suppose, ignorance and stupidity out there about these type of things that you can say what you want. And the other thing that I found really interesting about this is that this whole spectre of people abusing people socially with a view to attracting followers to themselves and that kind of thing. That's all very well and good, and to get a high record rate that's going to cost you €100,000 to get out of, plus legal fees. I was kind of a bit taken aback with that. And the other thing that, if you don't mind me saying, that it kind of really did astonish me is that people maybe who are engaged in this type of debate online, they have this bizarre view of themselves as being public figures of some sort. One person I spoke to who said to me, now, like, I can't be quoted because I'm a public figure. And I'd never heard of this person before. I'm pretty sure that no one in the media has heard of this person before. But they had this belief, because they had a large number of followers, that they were a public figure. I think that's quite an interesting phenomenon that's sort of in development, that people think because you've a large number of people clicking on you from Twitter or wherever, that you've somehow transcended into something, or someone who's noteworthy or important or of public prominence. And they like, covering the story has been really interesting and eye-opening from that point of view.
It's a story, John, I suspect that you're going to continue to follow as it develops.
We may do, yeah. It's another fish to fry at the moment,
Well, I followed your Twitter feed and the interactions that you were getting, and yeah, it made for interesting viewing. But I think that it is an important interview that I'm having, and a conversation that we are having, because I'm always trying to flag that what you say online can definitely come back to you in the offline world. There is no demarcation. Thank you for the extensive insights, and hopefully finally maybe putting some clarity in a lot of the questions that people have, and perhaps it will allow people to rethink, reflect and consider how they might act, behave and speak online. So John Mooney from the Sunday Times, thank you so much for joining me.
No problem. Thank you.
Shoutouts.
In this part of the show, I give shoutouts to brands, organisations or individuals whose work online is remarkable and worth talking about. In this episode, I'm sharing 3 ways to audit a blogger's digital influence.
1.
Too often, brands and organisations have a look at influencers' fans and actually don't take a closer look at the detail of social engagement. So what do I mean by social engagement? Quite simply, it's the number of people and the extent of the interactions that an influencer is getting on their platforms, whether that's Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, or Twitter. So if you want to hire an influencer, make sure that their social engagement is higher than about 2%.
2.
I'm not so sure that anybody hiring an influencer gets into the detail about the numbers around an email list or website traffic. For me, these are 2 really important metrics that anyone hiring a blogger should be measuring. When it comes to the email list, did you know that email conversions are higher amongst any other digital channel? So you really want to know how many people an influencer has subscribed to their email list. This is a sure sign of loyalty. Similarly, when you're talking about your brand's product or service, you want to be able to drive people to an influencer's website. We have conversations on social, but conversions happen on websites. So make sure you find out the monthly users that your influencer has on their website.
3.
How many times have you discovered that an influencer or a public figure has bought their Twitter or Instagram followers? It's a big problem in the digital age, and unfortunately, people do get sucked into elevating their followers. So, if you want to see how many followers your influencer actually has, then you can do a fake follower audit. Stay tuned for Social Media Tool of the Week to find out how to do it on Instagram.
Ask JSB.
In this week's Ask JSB, I'm recounting a coaching call that I had with a client. She asked me if I thought collaborations with bloggers is actually worthwhile, especially after the Bloggers Unveiled scandal. Well, my answer was quite simply, if a blogger and an influencer has an engaged audience that you want to tap into, if they're a professional in their approach, totally transparent, and also adhering to guidelines set out by the Public Relations Institute of Ireland and the Advertising Standards Authority of Ireland, then absolutely a collaboration is worthwhile. However, I've developed a blueprint which organisations should follow in terms of creating that partnership. There's no problem for bloggers or influencers to be paid to do a service. It's not unlike the old ambassadors that we used to have in the 80s or 90s, where we paid famous people to endorse products. Sometimes the problem with influencers and bloggers is that they're endorsing products and services from competing brands on consecutive weeks. And for me, that muddies the waters. If you have a digital marketing or social media question, don't forget you can have it answered on the show. Simply use the hashtag AskJSB on Twitter or Instagram. And you can also leave me a voicemail with your question at digitaltraininginstitute.ie/AskJSB. And of course, you can post a message on any of my social networks.
JSB's column.
In today's JSB's column, I share an interview I did with Highland Radio's Greg Hughes after the producer of the show read a Facebook status update I posted in the wake of the Bloggers Unveiled scandal. Greg is a tough interviewer, and what follows is my honest assessment of why people need to think before they post, why some bloggers give other bloggers a bad name, and how businesses and organisations working with influencers need to vet them before committing.
JSB Talks Digital.
Now, Gardaí have launched a criminal investigation into threats against a beautician incorrectly identified as the person behind Bloggers Unveiled, a social media account that touts itself as the unofficial watchdog of the Irish fashion and beauty industry. The anonymous Instagram account, which has more than 220,000 followers, states that it's dedicated to exposing so-called influencers and others who it says have misled or mistreated customers. There have been numerous attempts to identify the person behind it. Joanne Sweeney-Burke of the Digital Training Institute joins us now. Good morning to you, Joanne.
Good morning, Craig.
We are seeing these accounts all over the place, these influencers. Now, some of it's subtle, some of it not so subtle, but it's a thing and it's unregulated, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a booming industry. I mean, the growth of social media and individuals who have amassed huge followings and huge online tribes have been able to commercialise it. Some people are influencers and bloggers and perhaps they're getting free product and not necessarily getting cash in return. Now, in terms of the regulation, we have had two professional bodies step in to try and regulate the industry, if you like. So 2 years ago, the Public Relations Institute of Ireland came up with their own guidelines for their own PR professionals who would, on behalf of their clients, be hiring influencers. Then we had the Advertising Standards Authority of Ireland, who held a blogger event earlier this year, and it's now illegal to actually put out content in which you are getting paid for that content without using the hashtag ad or FP representing sponsored posts.
And that's illegal in this country right now?
Yeah, absolutely. And there has been a precedent case where a blogger did get a warning. So, for example, Highland Radio have ads and, your advertisers are very clear that they're paying for the time on air. But when it comes to individuals actually getting paid to promote content on social, there is now a requirement that you are honest and transparent to declare that you are getting paid to promote, whether it's a piece of jewellery, a piece of clothing, or in fact makeup.
And who is policing it? I mean, is it? I can imagine that any cases that are investigated probably, I'm guessing, of course, probably are off the back of complaints, as opposed to, is there a staff that's trying to weed out those that aren't adhering to the rules?
Absolutely, you're absolutely right. And indeed, that case that I mentioned, it was a complaint that was raised. And this account, Bloggers Unveiled, was set up 8 months ago. And as you their introduction, it claims to make the industry more transparent. However, if you look at the commentary and the moderation on that account, it was far from being moderated in my view.
Do you get the impression, I didn't see it, Joanne, do you get the impression really it was someone or a group of people with a gripe against all influencers, but was sort of setting itself up as if it was actually policing it, when in effect really it probably hadn't great time for any of them?
Well, I think my issue with it is if you're setting up a social media account and upholding your own moral law, if you like, and you're setting down the rules of that moral law, then I think you should put a face to it. This was an anonymous account, and they did say in their bio that they would not tolerate abusive comments, but they would not equally take responsibility for them. And anybody who runs social media accounts, you are responsible for moderating, but the level of vitriol on that Instagram account was absolutely horrific, and it got very, very personal. And I think then that the blogger industry in itself was feeling a bit peeved by it. However, I think the resolution to this is definitely professionalising the industry. I mean, as a journalist, we are bound by the AEJ standards. If you work in public relations, you're bound by the standards of the Public Relations Institute of Ireland. And I think that individuals who want to make a career out of being an influencer and a blogger, and absolutely it totally is a career, and a very nice career where you can make a nice income, but you really need to adhere to standards, and I think the industry needs to be professionalised a little bit more.
I wonder how you police it, though, because you could have someone that goes, this is my life, look at me, this is what I've achieved, you can do that, this is how I feel, and then they go through the cycles, and then next it could be a guy or a girl, and that, I feel like rubbish today, this is what my real body's like, have a look at this product, I don't know how you actually police it, because it's a funny space, the way products are eventually, or services are eventually sold within it, because it's sort of this it's almost like reality TV, scripted reality, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, and we already know that reality TV in itself, and Love Island has just finished, that people are absolutely addicted to it. And again, it's this voyeurism, because we can watch people's lives ongoing in social media. It's a source of entertainment, but also it's a source of inspiration, and especially for many young people. And I think that's where the danger lies, is that these accounts are hugely influential. And a lot of the conversations over the past 72 hours around Bloggers Unveiled even discuss how people have been training to be trolls. And I think the fact that there's anonymity built into an account that tries to show transparency is a bit of a contradiction.
Joanne, do you think it's time that people have to prove their identity? Because, the Gardaí are going to have their work cut out for them. And I think you pointed this out in a blog post as well, in that, it is anonymous. How are they going to track the person down behind this account that we've been talking about? Because anyone can open up any amount of accounts. They can mask their IP address. There's no end of ways to sort of avoid getting into trouble. Is it time, in your opinion, that that accounts had to be validated in some way or another? In other words, each account has to be connected to an identifiable person. Yeah,
and in actual fact, we have to provide an email to the social network, but of course you can set up a Gmail account or a Yahoo account and essentially remain anonymous. I think from the Garda Síochána's point of view, I don't think they have the resources to be dealing with online complaints at whatever level. Yes, if there are death threats, and in this case it was alleged that there were death threats, then they have to take them serious. But I think that when the Gardaí get involved, they will have access to the social network. When law enforcement make a request, they would have stronger powers than those of us as individuals. But, we've seen a number of cases in recent days, and I've already stated that there are nation-state laws where people can and have been prosecuted. For example, there was a case, in fact, in Donegal a number of years ago where a guy was convicted under the Criminal Damage Act for frapping his girlfriend, so logging into her Facebook account and purporting to be her and putting out some pretty nasty comments. And we've seen Vicky Phelan, who's been an advocate of the cervical smear and promoting better cervical smear cases, removing herself from Twitter in the past 72 hours because of the trolling and the vitriol that she was subjected to. Yesterday, we see the prosecution being taken against a man in Northern Ireland following the Belfast rape trial for allegedly identifying the complainant in that case. And we've already seen the trolling gather momentum now with the presidential election and the candidates who are in the race. So politicians are in an awkward space here, aren't they, Joanne? Because, I know Fine Gael are advocating at the moment for tighter controls on social media. But what a lot of people feel that is the establishment trying to, shut down dissenting voices. And I can see how people might feel that that's what's happening. But also then you mentioned the Vicky Phelan case, a true hero in this country that has brought us to where we are in identifying the failings of in the cervical check scandal, having to go off Twitter. So it's a line to be. It's a difficult one to legislate for because, as I say, the allegation is out there that the big parties, the governments, want to shut down dissenting voices, and a lot of that's in the social media space. Absolutely, and we've just seen Facebook yesterday addressing a Oireachtas committee, and the chair of that Oireachtas committee said Nocton as a number of actions that she's going to take. I do get it. I mean, I don't think people should be muzzled and censored in terms of free speech. And I've already spoken, even at my summit a couple of months ago, about how trust and transparency is the number one currency online, and that the shift of power between church, state and big business is now swinging into the hands of the citizen, who now suddenly have a voice. And when that voice gets together and chants loud, in the case of, any issue, they will be heard, and the media will take on the story, and then ultimately the institutions of the state have to respond. So I think from a political point of view, yes, politicians need to be careful in how they legislate and how they approach legislation, because free speech is something that we've fought for in this country, and we live in a democracy, and I think we all treasure it.
But you mentioned Facebook. We only have to look at Facebook to see how hard that line is to walk, because, what is allowing people to express their points of view, Tommy Robinson, ATC and others, and then what is hate speech and what is, as I say, it depends on who you ask. That's the complication that even an organisation like Facebook has internally. And then how do you legislate for that, from a government perspective? And because it's a global thing, really it requires a global response. I mean, the government can pass laws here, but, someone can post something in Sweden and we can access it here. It's complicated.
It is complicated, and I guess perhaps one thing that we should be teaching from a very young age in our primary schools is digital citizenship, the safe, savvy and ethical use of the internet, so that we all take personal responsibility for what we put out, and that we understand that our words in real life, as with our words online, can have serious ramifications for whether it's a criminal case or whether it's somebody else's mental health or their good name, reputation, or their business. So perhaps starting with regulating what we all say as individuals on a good place to start. And I think the government actually could, champion, and the Irish government should champion this in Europe, and actually teaching digital citizenship, because, you see adults online and you wonder, where the common sense goes with some of the comments that go out there. And it's true that research has been done that many people who say things online would actually not say it to somebody's face.
All right.
So personal responsibility is important.
Interesting stuff. Thanks, Joanne.
Thanks, Greg.
All right, take care. Nice to chat to you. Joanne Sweeney-Berg there of the Digital Training Institute.
Social media tool of the week.
The social media tool that saved my working week this week is Fake Check. Fake Check is an easy-to-use web-based tool to check any public Instagram account. With no login required, you can get an insight into the quality of any Insta account's followers. Fake Check analyses an Instagram account and their 20 most recent posts to see how engaged their followers are. This is the level of social engagement, which is more important than social reach. If the resulting ratios for likes and comments based on the number of followers is outside the industry standard, it is likely that the account has paid for Instagram followers. Another reason someone might have non-engaged followers is because they are bots. Instagram bots are script-driven accounts that are used for various reasons. To hide their computer heart and to make them seem more human, they post random comments and follow random people to hide their true purpose. I think we've all seen those Instagram bot posts. If you want to check an Instagram account for fake followers, you simply unlock the report by using credits. Credits start from $1. Find out more at fakecheck.co. Thank you so much for tuning in to episode number 112 of JSB Talks Digital. If you're a regular listener to the show, I would love a review. And don't forget, we're now on Google Podcasts, reaching even more Android users. As always, I have everything discussed on today's show on my award-winning blog over at digitaltraining.ie. And don't forget, if you're a public sector marketing pro, the doors to our diploma open on September 3rd. You can find out more at publicsectormarketingpros.com /diploma. And I'm also launching a brand new podcast for you guys, so listen out for that. Thank you all for continuing to listen, but don't forget you can get in touch between now and the next show. You'll find me on Twitter at Tweets by JSB, on Instagram as JSB Grams, and on Snapchat as JSB Snaps. I'm Joanne Sweeney Burke. This is JSB Talks Digital. Thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you soon.
JSB Talks Digital.